Anyway, glad y'all are all here. I see a lot of familiar faces. My name is Margaret McMurray Griffith. The only reason I got to go to Texas A&M when I did was because my daddy was a professor and assistant dean out at vet school. Otherwise, I would not have been able to go when I did. Okay, I'm going to run through a brief little history of Texas A&M. In 1876, can you get rid of this thing? There we go. Texas A&M came into fruition, or whatever. A Senate committee said the college should be open to both genders. Well, the first catalog read admission was limited to white male students, 14 years old and older. So apparently women weren't admitted to A&M. First women to complete degree requirements in A&M were twins, Sophie and Mary Hudson, in 1903. Well, they could complete the degree requirements. They entered at 14. Woo! Anyway, they could not receive their degree. They got a certificate instead, even though one of the twins had the highest GPA in her whole class. So, you know, it's just hard to be a girl back then, harder than it is now. In 1909, women were admitted to summer school sessions. The legislature ordered it. But they were not allowed to be in class with the men. They had to take classes separately from the men. They were, along the years, special students were admitted under special circumstances. President Bazell wanted women to be admitted, and they admitted a few of them, including his daughter. In 1993, President Walton allowed daughters of faculty and staff to attend because the financial situation of these professors and staff was really dire. That was the Depression. Their salaries had been cut tremendously, so they allowed some of the women to go then. In 1946, regular summer school started with females returning, and they had special classes for women in 1946. That was after the war, okay? My mother took classes there. Daddy was a vet. They were both actually vets because they were both in the Marine Corps, and they came back to A&M, and the women could take classes, but they couldn't be with the men. So every semester, they met with different professors and decided which classes they wanted to take. I even have her transcript. In 1953, Senator Bill Moore, class of 40, introduced a resolution to force admission of women. Well, it was voted down. In 1957, the battalion surveyed students, and they voted so vehemently against coeducation. In 1958, 3 women applied and were rejected. They sued, charging discrimination. John Barron, class of 35, represented them, and he got in a lot of heat for that. Judge William McDonald found on behalf of the women and ordered A&M to open to women. He was twice hung in effigy on the A&M campus. In 1959, both the Eagle and the Battalion ran separate supportive editorials in support of women coming to A&M. It's been a long, hard haul. In 1960, our then president, Earl Rudder, our president, Earl Rudder, became president. In 1962, now, if y'all remember Earl Rudder, he was a general. He was a military man. He had a lot of knowledge that not the average person had of the military. In 1962, John Connally was governor, and he appointed 9 Aggies to the Board of Regents. Well, that was the key, because on April 27, 1963, the board unanimously approved limited coeducation at Texas A&M. They admitted African Americans and women starting June 1st in 1963. Really and truly, the guys didn't care that there were African Americans there. They were guys, for the most part. What they cared about is that there were women there. They didn't want women there. And eligible women admitted to graduate programs and vet programs, veterinary medicine, as day students. I vividly remember Sonia Oliphant, who was the first female vet student. She was about that high. I don't think she was even 5 feet tall. She was from Poteet, Texas, and she could break a horse just like any of those guys. And they all just accepted her totally once they saw her skills. Anyway, wives and daughters of faculty and staff, wives of students and residents, and women staff could go as full-time students. In 1964, there were 183 females admitted. In 1965, when I started in the spring, there were 320 admitted. Now, I went that spring. I'm from a family of 3 girls. I didn't really have any idea how differently boys were treated. I went to Texas Tech my first semester because I really wanted to get away from College Station and away from home. Do y'all understand that concept? Yeah. Well, little did I know that women at Texas Tech had to be in the dorm at 8 o'clock, Monday through Thursday nights. I said, you know, I didn't have to do this at home. I don't really care for this. So I came back and went to A&M. Well, there's all kinds of stuff about living at home that you don't care for too, but you know, it's a lesser of 2 evils, I thought. Well, little did I know. I had never, ever sat in a group where a man told a dirty joke. Ever. Now, that was a long time ago. Today, it happens all the time. You know, you could be sitting in a restaurant and somebody's telling a very off-color joke on the table next to you, or maybe at your own table. But professors did that. And I was the only girl in all my class, and I was just horrified, absolutely horrified. I remember taking a class where the professor had a graph, and he drew it like this, and he filled in the tops. And said, what does that remind y'all of? Yeah, I mean, it was really, really bad. And I think, looking back on it, it wasn't so much as to run us off, but it was primarily probably what they did when it was all guys. I don't really know. But it was just horrifying to me. And then I went to my advisor for pre-med. And he goes, well, honey, you don't want to be a doctor. Why do you want to be a doctor? You're just going to take the place of some man. And you're going to stay home and have baby after baby and raise those babies. And I went to see him 3 or 4 times. And he didn't help me one bit. He says, you just need to choose something else. And I didn't know it, but I met a gal from Bryan years later. She had the same experience with him. So there was no central location where you could go to meet other women who were there, and you were just kind of this island all alone. Now, if there were 2 or 3 guys, they might say something nasty to you, like, why don't you go home? One-on-one, they were terrific. Absolutely terrific. Aggies were gentlemen. They opened the door for you. They did all kinds of stuff. They were really, really nice. I got to know a lot of them as really, really good friends. But some of them were really, really, really filled with venom about women being there. Like I said, if you talked to them in private, they were like, we're really glad you're here. It's fine. And they were always shocked if they asked you for a date, that you weren't booked up for months to come. It was the best of times and the worst of times. I actually quit school that semester because I really just couldn't handle it. And that summer, my parents went on a big vacation, and I didn't go with them. I had a friend who was at A&M, and she was never going to have the opportunity to live in a dorm. And that summer, they opened Dorm 14, which is Keeley or Keithley Hall. It is one of the balcony dorms right across from Henderson Hall, which was, do you remember? The football dorm, that's right. Anyway, they allowed a few of us, there were 5 of us from different schools to live in that dorm. Well, if you know anything about that dorm, it was built like a motel, the old-timey motels, with the balconies on the outside and no central halls. So, okay, there was no phone and no TV. And guess when they wanted us to be in? 8 o'clock at night. And I said, you know what, this isn't gonna cut it. So I got a couple of the other gals and we went to visit with Benny Zinn. Nice man, director of housing. And I said, Mr. Zinn, I know this is your first time with girls in a dorm. And I said, but I think if you'll call other universities, beyond their freshman year, women are allowed to be out until 10 or 10:30. And so he called around and they later, now see, that's not even in the history. That's just my own personal experience. But they allowed us to be in at 10:30, and we had a little gal that was watching over us. We were in a dorm where they had a lot of NSF teachers and that sort of stuff. Well, they watched over us and we snuck out all the time and had a great time that summer. Anyway, I bounced back and forth between A&M, where there really, if you were a woman, wasn't much to be involved in on campus, like there is at most colleges and universities, and I bounced back and forth between A&M and Sam Houston. There was another little road there. You know, some of you may remember who were Aggies back then. General Rudder's dog, Ranger. Yeah, I know, he was cool, wasn't he? He was one of those close to the ground bulldogs, you know, just like really gruff looking. Well, they painted him constantly with Maggie's Go Home. Okay? So that poor dog, and he was allowed and ran everywhere on campus. Anyway, in 1974, the first female dorm was built at Kruger Hall. Women were admitted to the Corps and were called Waggies, okay? They were not involved in any of the Corps activities, not at all. They couldn't be in Ross Volunteers, they couldn't be in the CAB, they couldn't be in anything. The only one thing that they could do was they had a women's fish drill team. And they had to drill with fake weapons because they did not want them competing with the men. So in 1981, bonfire, girls could actually work on bonfire instead of being cookie and brownie people, because girls used to bring the cookies and brownies out there. So anyway, things have really gone downhill. That's my husband. He said things have really gone downhill. Anyway, when I was honored with Howdy Camp, I took Craig with me for a day. And Howdy Camp and Fish Camp were both just awesome. If you ever get a chance to go, go. And he said, they didn't have this when I was here. I said, of course not. They didn't have women when you were here. So women have added a tremendous dimension to Texas A&M University. When I came back and went to work at A&M, they nicknamed me Maggie the Aggie. And I actually got to talk to all different student groups. I mean, it was just so much fun. But one of the groups I talked to was Maggies. There is a student group named Maggies. And you know who they are? They're the women leaders from all over the campus. And I said, y'all make me so dadgum proud. Anyway, it was the best of times, the worst of times. It was a lot of fun, but it did make you realize that, you know, it's a terrible thing to be discriminated against with something that you essentially are. Okay? I mean, and I can talk to anybody anywhere. It made me more unshy than I ever was. I wouldn't have traded my experience for the world. Grew up watching the bull ring. Y'all remember the bull ring? And those guys selling those mums. Oh man, I remember the day I got my first mum. Oh, it was so exciting, and it didn't even have all those streamers and all that junk that they have today. But anyway, it was a really different time. It was a lovely time, but I'm really thrilled to be here talking with you all about it, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Well, Well, I started in the fall of 1966, and people like Margaret and others had kind of paved the way, but going to Texas A&M was really different for women. For one thing, you were a female in a majority men's university, and so you were not afraid, you learned to not be afraid to talk to men. And as she mentioned, you did feel like a minority, but things had improved. I have some great memories of those times. I worked 3 jobs when I was a student. I worked for the registrar's office because back then, when I started, there were 8,000 students at A&M, and when I graduated, there were 13,000. Up until my senior year, all of the registration for people that were going to A&M was done by hand. And then we finally got the little punch cards, but I worked for the registrar's office. I also worked for the Department of Modern Languages, and I worked at the Texas A&M Library. So what I would do is in the mornings, I would come in to park where today it's Rudder Tower, because that was right behind Guyan Hall that was closed, and that was the day student parking lot. And I would go from, class, I would go to class, but in between classes, then I would go and work either for the language department or for the library. One of the things that was very interesting about working at the A&M Library was you met so many people. Of course, most of them were still men, but the library, when I was there, got copiers, and we got the first copier that the public could use on the first floor where I worked. So my job was to service the copier and help people learn or do the copying. And especially for people that were international students, when we would make a copy for 10 cents and it would come out, they would be so excited, they would like be jumping up and down, that this was just this really cool thing for them to do. It was, like they had won the lottery. There were not any groups for women when I was there until my senior year. There was finally a group called University Women. But I was able to do SCONA and Great Issues, and I really enjoyed that. And there were a few other women, and I was looking back through my ID lands yesterday, and when I started on the pages that show the pictures of everybody, there were quite a few pages that had women, but there were quite a few that didn't. But by the time my senior year came around, on every single page there was a picture of a woman. And most of the women were majoring in things in liberal arts or going to be teachers. Just a few of them were in the sciences. One thing that was different about A&M, going there was different, was that there was an extreme lack of restrooms. As you can imagine, you had to know where the restrooms were on campus. Another thing was, when I went to A&M, we dressed up. We didn't wear or not wear what they wear today. We, were neat and orderly. And I do remember on the weekends trying to go to the language lab that was in the academic building, and there was a big sign on the door, women, no pants are allowed. Of course, we wouldn't have thought of wearing them, but maybe, they were just trying to let us know for sure, I don't know. As a woman at A&M, you had to have 4 semesters of PE. Well, they didn't have any women's locker rooms, so you had a choice of either taking bowling or golf. So I had the opportunity to have 4 semesters of bowling. And one of the fun times was, and this would happen from time to time, General Rudder's little dog, Ranger, would come in and come into the bowling alley. Well, he would, hear all the noise and people jumping up and down, and he would come over and he would see somebody had thrown the ball down the bowling alley, and then he would start chasing the ball. And of course, it's very slick, and then a ball would be coming back on the return, and they would have to completely close the bowling alley down and stop everything and catch Ranger and put him back outside so we could go on with our bowling. And then Ranger also would come around, like I was in a big lecture hall for a chemistry class once, and it was a rainy day, so the guys that were in the Corps were wearing their raincoats and the pots. Well, Ranger would go all the way up to the top of the stairs, and then he would go along until he would find some Corps guy's pot, and then he'd push it down, and it would start going down and down and down, and the professors would have to stop because everybody was in hysterics over Ranger. One of the, it was a different time, but because I came along later, I didn't have people or guys say to me things that were inappropriate, except for one time I walked into a class minding my own business. I sat down and this guy in front of me, who was a senior, turned around and said something to me. I don't even remember what it was. And I just looked at him and I said, "Shut up and don't ever talk to me again." And there were two other guys that were in the Corps that were already there, and they just started laughing at the senior, but it never happened again. One of the things that was really nice about A&M was that, and I have great memories about, was Pinky Downs. He was always a cheerful friend to everyone, whether you were female or a male. And he unfortunately passed away my senior year, and they had a really nice funeral for him. Some other great memories I have, one is in 1968, going to the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, and it was freezing, but that was the game where A&M beat Alabama, and our coach, Gene Stallings, got picked up and hugged actually by Bear Bryant, and I still remember seeing that. That was really a neat thing. Randy Madsen was there at A&M, and he was winning a lot of different medals, including a couple of Olympic medals. General Rudder died our senior year, and there was a big funeral. It was almost like a state funeral for him that was held in G. Raleigh White. And I think one of the best deals ever was when I was at A&M. It was only about, I think, around $100 a semester to go to A&M by the time you paid all your fees and all. And I lived at home with my mom and dad, and so, I didn't have a lot of expenses, but you had to buy something called a student activity card. It was $50. Now think about this. That covered every home football game, every home basketball game, every home baseball game, all sports activities, plus they had something called Town Hall, which was a precursor of Opus. And granted, you had to go sit in G. Raleigh White to hear these people, but it was also free with your activity card. And we had people like Al Hurt, Johnny Rivers, The Fifth Dimension, Johnny Mathis, Montavani, Peter, Paul and Mary, the Association, Simon and Garfunkel, and other speakers come in. And so that was really a lot of fun. So I'm happy I went to A&M. My husband's here. We're both in the class of 70. We knew each other through our church as we were going through school, but he was in a totally different major than I was, so we never had any classes together. And then our senior year, we started dating, and we got married, and been married 43 years. So, anyway. Well, thank you. Margaret did a great job of introducing things, and so Linda's gonna finish and tell her highlights of her days.
It's really fun listening, excuse me, to both Margaret and Sarah, because they have a lot of the same memories. But when they make references to General Rudder, Margaret and I went to school with one of his daughters, Linda Rudder, and we were over at their house frequently. And to us, he was just Mr. Rudder. He wasn't General Rudder. He wasn't president of Texas A&M. He was Linda and Jane's dad. The nicest, warmest, big teddy bear of a man you could ever hope to meet. We were very blessed to just be, hanging out at the Rudder house all the time. When you mentioned the lecture hall, those things were huge. In every single class I had, I was the only girl. So it was kind of like this neon light. But just to back up a little bit, I went to Southwest Texas my freshman year in 1965-66. My parents weren't associated with the university. I wasn't an Aggie White. So I went to Southwest Texas and majored in speech therapy. The next year, in 1966, they let girls within a 30-mile radius go to A&M. So, oh my gosh, they had girls from Navasota Caldwell, Snook at A&M. We were a very small group of people. They didn't have a speech therapy program, and I got a glimmer of this potential for a social life at A&M. So I majored in something I was very good at, English, and minored in theater arts. Excuse me. Do y'all remember C.K. Eston, the voice of Kyle Field? I worked for him for 3 years in the bowels of Guyan Hall. I was the only girl on the Aggie Land Players. I lost my Texas accent thanks to him. He was from New York, the biggest Yankee you would ever hope to meet. He hated our Texas accent. So with me being cooped up with him for 3 years, I lost a lot of my accent, unless I get mad and then it comes back. When I transferred back to A&M, I lost so many of my credits from San Marcos. And so I went to summer school every summer, took 16 to 17 hours every semester, just to try and catch up. They were talking about discrimination. I had a math teacher tell me, Miss Bloom, I don't care what you make in this class, you will flunk. You could go to your advisors, they were as apathetic as the teachers. You could go to the school dean, the dean of that school, they didn't care either. They really, just in my experience, they did not go out of their way to help the girls. They made it even more difficult as they could. I was the only girl in all of my classes. I didn't really have anybody tell me any dirty jokes. Just because I probably didn't get them. I still don't get a lot of them. But when I went to A&M, we'll just talk about the social life. For some reason, that's what sticks out in my head. Ratio was 500 guys to every single girl. I mean, really, candy shop heaven. And I was, in my sophomore year, when I was going to go register at A&M, there in the registrar's office, standing in line with all these guys, and this really cute boy comes up and starts talking to me, and I'm getting really excited. It's really the first one that's acknowledged me. He said, well, hey, do you have a date for the game Saturday night? No, I don't. Would you like to go? Yes, I would. So we make plans, and he leaves, and this other, even better looking guy comes up, starts talking. He said, do you have a date for the game Saturday night? Oh, yes, I do. Well, would you like to go to yell practice before the game? I would love that. The other guy didn't ask me to yell practice. I didn't figure out how I was going to juggle these. So anyway, the guy's name was Gene Reiser and Tommy Stone. And Gene said, well, I'll pick you up for yell practice, and then I'll make sure you get to your date. I didn't tell him who I had a date with. So he picks me up, he takes me in the stands, he was in Company A, and he left me, he deposited me in Company A, and went down on the field, where my date for the football game was. They were both senior yell leaders. And it was like, oh no, what am I? Because neither one of them knew who I had a date with. And it turned out they already didn't like each other. They were very competitive. And so that really was fun, I have to admit. I dated both of them for a while, and then stopped dating Tommy and kept on dating Gene. But you could go anywhere on campus, and you would have mixed reactions. Did anybody remember Henry Cisneros? He was a drum major at A&M. I was a sophomore, and I remember seeing him stride across the campus in his senior boots. He was always just like that. He slammed the door in my face so many times and would cut me off, everything he could to make sure he resented my being there. Years later, I'm flying on an airplane, first class, I'm sitting right behind Mayor Henry Cisneros. I couldn't let it go. I was sitting right behind him, and I go, Henry, do you remember me? And I'm Linda Bloom, and I'm Linda Bloom, and you were a senior when I was a sophomore at A&M, as he's kind of, you know, getting all prepped up, and said, man, I can still see you strolling across campus in your senior boots. And by now his head's like this, because I have recognized him for his past glory. And so by now he's turned all the way around. And I said, you hated us girls at A&M, didn't you? His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. And then, of course, lied and said, no, he really loved it. But you know, that had been a burr under my blanket for all those years. And I couldn't pass up the opportunity. And then look what happened to him anyway. So, in my classes, you know, they said several times I was the only girl, and back then I used to wear these long dangly earrings, and the professor would always sit me right smack dab in the middle of the room. Whether it was a lecture hall, it was always like a neon light. Well, I was blessed to know how to wiggle my ears. And so in class, with these long dangly earrings, can y'all see? I'm wiggling my ears out there. I'd get my earrings going. And the guys behind me would just crack up. And the professor would stop and say, what's so funny back there? They never once turned me in. You know, as Sarah said, I took bowling for 3 years. And it really was fun. It was another one of those great social opportunities. See, I didn't look at that as a hardship. You know, I liked to bowl, and I liked the boys I was bowling with. It was great. 2 weeks before I was supposed to graduate from Texas A&M, I was called into the graduate advisor's office, and they said, Linda, we hate to tell you, but you're 4 hours short of graduating. 4 of your elective credits did not transfer from Southwest Texas State. And they're just now finding this out. He said, nothing we can do about it. You're gonna have to go to summer school. Well, I was getting married in 2 weeks and moving to California. I went to the dean of the liberal arts school. He was as apathetic as the advisor was. And back then they didn't have the correspondence courses that you could take. You couldn't go online. So I didn't graduate from A&M. I lacked 4 elective hours. And I did get my degree when I moved to California. I have 2 master's degrees. When I moved back home, I thought, I've got to have my degree from A&M. So I checked in where I stood. I would have been only halfway through my sophomore year in terms of hours. And you know, yes, I'm bitter because I think that at that time they didn't pay due diligence to girls. That I had gone to summer school every summer. I had taken 16, 18 hours every semester. And 2 weeks before graduation, they tell me for my elective, which really doesn't mean a whole lot anyway, they weren't going to let me graduate. So I was pretty upset about that, as you can imagine. Fortunately, I have 3 daughters that have graduated from A&M. They've never encountered the discrimination we did, and that's exactly what it was. You know, they've got a lot of opportunities for the girls now. It was a wonderful time to go, but you know, when you think back to us being pioneers, more or less, and blazed a lot of trails, it was because we didn't give up. And you know, we survived it. We have great stories, we have great memories, and I'm glad to see it is where it is today, because I think now there's actually more girls at A&M than there are guys. And you know, so I just always consider those of us who went to A&M in the early days as the trailblazers. Does anybody have any questions or want to share one of your experiences? Yes, ma'am. Let me see. I don't have a portable mic.
Can you tell us where the name Maggies originated? How that came about?
Guys in the corner.
No, maggot. Maggot plus Aggie equals Maggies.
What?
Maggot.
Maggot
Plus Aggie.
plus Aggie. I was called Maggies, but I didn't know I was being called a maggot.
Well, you knew it was not a good word.
Well, that's what we were
Not the way
called.
they used it.
You know, I don't think I ever thought anything
well, it wasn't.
negative about it. Yes, sir.
The question was, where did the word Maggies come from?
Maggot and Aggies.
Maggies.
Maggot and Aggies equals Maggies.
Oh, that's how
Does that answer your question? But you know, once again, I didn't consider it that's just what we were called. And I never had it said to me derogatorily. Yes, ma'am.
Did the men have a curfew?
We were just there for summer school. Are you talking about universities in general? No.
So it was just during the summer that you were there?
Yes, yes. But even when I was at Tech, one of my guy friends from high school would call me at midnight and go, ha, 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 we just got in. And I'm like, Warren, shut up. Yeah, guys really didn't have a curfew.
Yeah, I knew that was the trend at the
Yeah.
beginning during that time.
Yeah. I must say something about General Rutter that I totally left out. General Rutter was a very brave man. And he was a very insightful man. There was talk of the military going to all-volunteer army, and he knew that was probably going to happen after Vietnam went down, and that sort of played into his supporting that decision. In addition, he had 3 daughters. But he was the victim of death threats and all kinds of things, because, I mean, this was serious stuff. They were going to go down fighting. They did not want women here. So, yeah, anyway, sorry.
On your table, we ran off some copies of some articles that came out of the Bryan Daily Eagle, and I got these from a coworker of mine. What happened was in 1963, when women were admitted, her mother worked for the Chamber of Commerce, I believe it was. And she knew that a UPI photographer was coming down to take pictures of A&M, that they were going to allow women to come in. So she called my friend Kathy up, who was home from Texas Tech on break for the winter. And she said, get 2 of your girlfriends, get some books, go down, jump up on top of those Aggie A&M signs out at the front, and the UPI photographer will take your picture. And so they did, and so that's what we gave you a copy of. And then this was from January 1st of 1964. And the #1 news item for the entire year was women being admitted to A&M.
Did you tell them they didn't even go to A&M?
And also, what was it?
They didn't even go to A&M.
No, none of these women that are in the picture ever went to A&M. They were just there for them.
Now, Dr. Boone, weren't you a professor at A&M when we were there?
Sure was.
Do you have any memories of?
Yeah, remember any of the jokes?
Here was the jokes, I love it.
Well, I don't know the problem about those dirty jokes. I taught at A&M for about 15 years before women came. And I never told jokes in my classes. It just never occurred to me. Now, I listened to a lot of them. But I taught there 36 years. About half of that time, all male, and the last half was co-ed. And I had mixed feelings too. I wondered what kind of a woman would come to A&M. So I had those thoughts. What kind of, but I found out right away. The first semester, I looked out, about 30% of my class were women. And they were the A students. They changed everything. Before they came, the motto at A&M was, "Will operate to graduate." And these Aggies knew how to do it. They kept the curve down, and you couldn't do much about it. But when these women came in, they were there for the A's, and it changed everything. And it embarrassed the young men pretty quickly. It had to happen, so they began to compete for the A's too. And I remember telling my class about the second year, I said, "You know, you men are getting a whole lot better education now that these women are here." to be honest, I felt like I was having to raise the level of what I was doing because the women were out there. I mean, I don't know about other professors, but I really felt like, you know, I just had to do better. And so that's my memories of it. I got a story about Ranger though. General Rudder's dog. Ranger had a habit. He liked to get in front of your car. Now, when you drove on the A&M campus, your speed dropped anyway. You know, everybody drove pretty slowly. But you look out there in front of you, and there's Ranger, and he's out in front of your car. And then he lets the car get closer and closer. First thing you know, you can't see him anymore because he's up right under your front bumper. Now, nobody wants to run over General Rudder's dog. Nobody. And when you can't see the Ranger, it will bother you. I actually remember the first time I stopped my car, got out of the car, because I had to know where Ranger was. And there he was, right under my radiator. He was grinning at me. That's what he would do. He would get in front of a car, and then he just liked to trot along right in front of the car, but under the hood, under the radiator, so you couldn't see him. It just bothered, and everybody on the sidewalk knew what was going on, all that. And they would just stop and look. That was also kind of tough on the driver. You look around and everybody's staring at you. Because they want to know what you're going to do about Ranger. But what you did about Ranger was you slowed down and you went at his speed. Anyway, everybody loved Ranger.
Oh, yeah.
But
That's a great dog.
when he got into your car, you just better be careful. But I don't know whether anyone ever hit him or not with a car. But my memories were good. The very first fall, I remember when the first norther blew in. It was in maybe late October, and our co-eds, they put their hose on and their Sunday dresses and came to class. And I remember walking down the sidewalk, seeing all the co-eds out there. They were dressed fit to kill. I knew then we were going to be all right.
And I didn't tell Dr. Boone that I was going to ask him to speak, you know, so thank you very much. But you know, what you're saying about, you know, dressing up, we girls wore dresses every day. You wore hose every day, or socks and loafers or something like that. We did not wear tennis shoes, jeans, slacks. It was not accepted. If you went to a football game, you wore a dress and hose and heels. It was a very formal type environment. And I'm sure that's why I'm such a conservative dresser today. We never had a chance to just branch out like the girls did. You know, we didn't get tattoos back then. We didn't dye our hair purple or have piercings in our nose and lips and all those other well, not that I know of. But
We didn't have Northgate like it is.
yeah, and we didn't have Northgate. You know, there really was not much of an entertainment center. You went to the campus theater downtown, to the Palace or the Queen. Guyan Hall was the focal point for so much of our social activity because they always had movies going on there. You know, and a lot of times they would play Never Been Licked, which, by the way, have y'all seen that? Do you remember Never Been Licked?
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be shown at the Bush Library for free on Thursday, November 14th. The rights to that film are owned by the class of 1960. And they had to jump through some pretty exclusive hoops to get permission to show We've Never Been Licked. So this is maybe one of the few opportunities you'll ever have to see that movie. But they used to show it at Guyan Hall all the time. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up. Does anybody else have any other thoughts, questions?
Linda, you might tell them I have pictures over here on the table of co-eds in 1964 cutting down a bonfire log tree. And I've also got some other articles, like the front page of the article Leon Hale did on Aggie Land's ordeal, all about women coming to A&M. I have that on computer if anybody would like a copy of it. I just need a computer address.
You know, I forgot totally to tell you how I met my husband. He was an Aggie. I was at Sam Houston, and my sweet mate's boyfriend's car broke down, and she was coming home to stay with me for the weekend. And the guy I was dating was going to be out of town. She says, "You've got to go out with this guy, or I can't go out with my boyfriend." I said, "Okay." Well, that was our first date in January, and on our first date, he asked me to senior ring dance in May. And we've been married for yeah, shows how desperate he was. We've been married for 45 years. Anyway, I have our senior ring dance picture over here. There was one ring dance at that time. I also have my pin. Do you remember getting pinned? You wore them over your left, yeah, over your heart on the left.
There you go.
Yeah, it was a pre-engagement kind of thing, yes.
My daddy made that senior ring.
Oh my gosh, how cool is that? Her daddy made the senior ring. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Anybody else have any other questions? Or do y'all, oh my goodness, for more, yes sir.
The Grove was a summer movie.
Oh yes, it was. The Grove was great. We used to go all the time. I don't know how we did that, because they didn't seem to be bothered by mosquitoes back in those days. Go ahead, yes.
You gave the dates of various times that women
Yes.
do things. What year, if you know, were women allowed in from anywhere, not just spouses or children?
It was probably.
I have that written down, and
Well, she's got
yeah.
And February of 1970. Okay?
Also, I didn't share with you how women finally got to be in the band. There was a gal who wanted to be in the band. They could be in the choir, remember, but they couldn't be in the band. Well, she sued A&E. And when she graduated, the then president would not shake her hand. Yes, yes. And when and they took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, "I don't see the problem. You know, of course they could be in the band. Same uniform, you know, what the heck, sure." So that's how women got to be in the band.
Tonight, from 5 to 6 p.m., room 2406 at the Memorial Student Center. This is Pioneers in a Journey Towards Inclusion. It's a panel discussion featuring 4 pioneers. There's going to be an author, a photographer, producer Sunny Nash, who is in the class of 77. And she's also one of the first African American female graduates. She actually did a presentation to us a couple of months ago, just a brilliant woman. Anyway, is there anything specific you'd like for me to?
Well, and we just encourage you to come. It's going to be a fabulous program. Sunny's is our featured speaker, and then she will be moderating this panel first. And then there's a lovely reception at the Stark Gallery after, and you're all invited. So if you can make it, it should, and there's parking, you know, pay parking, but it's right next to the MSC. So second floor of the MSC, and it's part of our 50 years of celebrating inclusion at Texas A&M. Engaging, what are our 3 words on there?
Engaging pioneers in a journey toward inclusion.
At any rate, 50 years celebrating inclusion of blacks and women. And Hispanics, yeah, but Hispanics were early on in it.
They came
yeah.
early.
Yeah. So come on and enjoy it.
5 to 6:30 p.m., room 2406 at the MSC. Is it free?
It's free.
Oh, it's free.
It's free.
That's even better.
There's food after.
Oh, and food. Is that free? Any other thoughts, comments? Well, thank y'all so much. Be careful outside, and we'll see you next time.